enhance your IQ and how to enhance your EQ. I know they have tapes of that series over there. I was also going to talk about IQ and EQ today, but with a different emphasis than what I gave at the youth, because there is a lot of material to cover. But I do want to mention a few things as we start. Intelligence is your capacity to learn, retain, and apply knowledge, and it has a lot to do with how successful you will be in life. It's often measured by an IQ test, which isn't always accurate, but it's the most accurate rendition we have. It's accurate in about 80% of people. It's related somewhat to academic performance, and college graduates' first job after graduation has been found to be related to their IQ. Advantages of higher intelligence is you're more efficient in studying, you're more creative, you're more logical, you're more persuasive, your influences increase, and you're actually more likely to become wealthy. Although not all people with high IQ are wealthy, because that's not one of their priorities. If it was a high priority for them, and one of their top 3 priorities, they would be wealthy. But wealth is not always the highest priority, which it shouldn't necessarily be. A large study that was followed for a long period of time showed that those with a higher IQ also had a lower risk of death. And so IQ improves longevity and it improves quality of life. There's a myth out there that genetics is all that matters, however. If your parents were very smart, then you're likely to be smart and do well in school. And one of the reasons why that myth is perpetuated is because often in a given society, people are raised in a rather uniform way. And if you're eating the same diet, watching the same entertainment, going to the same schools, and everything is pretty uniform, the one thing that is different is what? It's your genes. And so genetics seems to surface as being important in those settings. But the evidence is very clear that genetics is a minority player. It is not the majority player as far as your intelligence is concerned. Your lifestyle habits and environment is far more important. There is a myth out there, there's nothing you can do about it after age 18, and that myth is perpetuated by the fact that many people in America have to take an IQ test when they join the military. And at the age of 30, they've been through college now, they've been through a lot of life experiences, they've been through academics, they might even have their PhD at that point, and they think, you know what, I didn't do so well on that IQ test at age 18. I know I'm a lot smarter now. I'm going to pay my $40 and take this IQ test to see where I'm actually at. And for the vast majority of people who take that test, their IQ has not improved a single bit. And of course, they get a little disappointed in that. They think, what happened? I know I'm a whole lot smarter now. Why didn't I do so well on that test? Well, it turns out an IQ test is not measuring your knowledge. If it was measuring your knowledge, they would have definitely improved. It's measuring your capacity to learn, retain, and apply new knowledge. And their capacity has not improved because their lifestyle habits are virtually the same at age 18 as they are at 30, even though they've learned a lot more. But it's very clear that your capacity can dramatically improve. In fact, we are starting to run Optimize Your Brain programs that are just 5 days in length, sometimes longer, for people to actually come and stay. These are people that have not been able to get into medical school, for instance. And they will get on the principles in 5 days and then beginning to live those. Just in our last depression and anxiety recovery program, we did a memory test, pre and post. Memory significantly improves when you're on a better lifestyle and when you're on a better diet. And this is memory measured in several ways: short-term memory, medium-term memory, and long-term memory. It'll improve by about a half of standard deviation in just 10 days of changing your lifestyle. So it can start to improve rather quickly when you get on a better lifestyle. People that are highly intelligent lack common sense. That's a myth as well. Another myth, people that are highly intelligent are generally irritating to be around. That is true in some people that are highly intelligent, but that has to do with your EQ. If your EQ is low and your IQ is high, you're going to be a very irritable, smart person to be around. And sometimes EQ and IQ are not necessarily connected. So there's a myth that we need to dispel. But the temporal lobe is where our memory is primarily centered, there behind the ear. The occipital lobe is where our spatial orientation is at. Parietal lobe has to do with math and language. Cerebellum has to do with our coordination. And frontal lobe is the area where both EQ and IQ come together. Einstein had a little larger parietal lobe. He gave his brain to science, and we found out his parietal lobe was larger. But the frontal lobe is where both of those things come together. The frontal lobe is also, scientific studies show, as the seat of spirituality, morality, and the will. So as these individuals that come to our program learn spiritual themes and start reading the Bible, for instance, that will actually help their IQ and EQ. And I think if we did more studies on it, people would be surprised on how much it helps, but I know it will. I've been around long enough that when I research what Ellen White stated, I know that if you put it to the test in a study, you're going to find it to be true. And no one has done a study yet on this, but what she stated was that studying the Bible, focusing in on its grand themes, studying it from an analytical basis as well, comparing Scripture with Scripture, as we read and apply it in our lives, she says nothing else will enhance your intelligence greater. She says it's better than all other books combined as far as helping the intelligence is concerned. Now, that's a pretty powerful statement, but you need to understand Ellen White was for these other books. It wasn't like she should, neglect that. She mentioned that every student should learn anatomy and physiology. They should learn history. They should learn all of these things. She was for all of these other disciplines, so she didn't want us to be imbalanced in not knowing those other disciplines. But she said, as far as improving your capacity is concerned, there's no other book that will improve it, even compiling up books, than the Bible itself. And so that's a crucial element. And of course, the frontal lobe is the seat of spirituality, morality, and the will. Well stated. This is a secular textbook that's stating this, Guyton's Textbook of Physiology. But yet most people, when they go to learn how to enhance their intelligence, they totally neglect the spiritual aspect of this, and the practical spiritual aspect in particular. So let me, I just want to go down because, and I will open it up for questions. So I think that's how we'll handle this. Since I ended up. And now the nice thing about this talk is that the tape will be completely different than my previous tape for the youth. But in summary, taking care of our frontal lobe. We must protect it from mechanical injury. This is critically important. Studies show that if you suffer more than one concussion, your frontal lobe function will go down. Almost invariably. And a concussion is where you actually either get knocked out or you end up being dazed for a while and having to ask the same question again. This is something that's been learned in the National Football League, one of the most violent sports in America. It's not the most violent sport. The most violent sport is something that is just unconscionable, called UFC. UFC is where you basically have your bare hands with a little bit of boxing gloves, and you're in a cage with someone, and you're fighting to the, it appears to the death. But what happens in UFC is about half of the time the match ends as a result of one or both of the individuals suffering a concussion. And so they are significantly decreasing their frontal lobe abilities by participating in these sports. And that's why you can't be a UFC champion for a whole long period of time, because you also need to have analysis as well, and so your analytical ability goes down. But I'll just tell you, for instance, there was a quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys. His name was Troy Aikman. He won multiple Super Bowls. And one time he suffered a concussion in the game, and he was out for one play. And he got reoriented. And then as he was going out to the field for the third play, so he was out for one play, he was going out to the field again, he turned back to the coach and he said, "Which way are we going now?" And the coach said, "That way." And so he gets out there, and on that very next play suffers another concussion. And after that, Troy Aikman was not the same quarterback. He still had the same athletic ability. In fact, the Dallas Cowboys the next year would not hire him to be their quarterback. And so he knew he was a great passer. You know, quarterbacks are the ones that actually pass the ball, and they also make the decision with it. So there was a coaches meeting that came up, and so Troy Aikman stood at the goal line, and then 50 yards down the line, that would be 50 meters, he set up 10 mannequins. These are mannequins that look like football players, and they have jerseys on. And he took the ball, he just had 10 balls, and he took one ball and he hit the first mannequin right in the numbers. The next ball, he did the next mannequin right in the numbers. 10 balls in a row, hit them all in their jersey. And nobody would hire that man to be their quarterback. That's how accurate a passer he was. Why wouldn't they hire him? Because his decision-making ability had gone down as a result of mechanical injury of the brain. And so this is something that's often we don't think about. This is a good reason to wear your seatbelts, or if you're participating in, bicycle races, to have that helmet. You want to protect this brain from concussions. Now, fortunately, one concussion you can normally do still pretty good after a recovery period of time. There's a recovery period of time for concussions. But after 2 concussions, that's when things can start to go down significantly. And one of the areas where they're looking at, I hate to mention this, but there have been studies done on it, one of the areas that actually can cause, particularly when it's repeated, can cause some head trauma is a sport that's very popular in South Africa. You want to guess what that is? Well, rugby, yes. Rugby is one of those sports as well that you can have concussions from. But this sport is even more popular than rugby. It's soccer. Now you're saying, how in the world is there head injuries from soccer? It's actually when that ball's coming full force and you do your headbutt. And then you do another headbutt. And that headbutt actually produces some micro hemorrhages often as a result of repeated headbutts. So that's also one of the areas that has been studied. Now, in the National Football League, it's been so well demonstrated how damaging it is to the brain. National Football League players have depression. We've had football players come through our program, severe depression as a result of the frontal lobe compromise, their head trauma. Fortunately, there's things that you can do. It's not like life is over with at that point. By the way, Troy Aikman himself is an analyst on a television program that looks at football. And he still has a lot of wise things to say about it. He played it for years, and if he has time, he can actually say some pretty intelligent things. It's not like he's mentally retarded now, but it requires a higher level of frontal lobe function when you particularly are under pressure, and there's a lot of information to analyze, and you have to make a decision. But what happens is when the football players come to our program and they get through other frontal lobe enhancements, they can compensate to a large degree, and sometimes completely and even above where they were at before the injury occurred. We must supply it with good oxygen. How do we do that? Deep breathing. In fact, I would encourage you, we're sitting at meetings, at camp meeting a lot, but at least every 20 minutes, take 3 real deep breaths. Your oxygen saturation will go up. Your ability to learn what has happened during the program will go up. Give it good nutrition. I would encourage you to get some of the tapes on that we've had here. Get adequate sunlight. Sunlight is important for serotonin in the frontal lobe of the brain, particularly in the morning time. but also later in the day where you can get vitamin D. Control the inputs. One of the areas that significantly compromises the frontal lobe of the brain is syncopated rock and roll music and also entertainment television and entertainment movies. Significant frontal lobe compromise. In fact, in America, the best movie producers will not watch entertainment television or movies because their creativity goes down. The frontal lobe is where our creativity goes up, where we can be original and useful to others. And this is the area that, of course, made the profound difference in Ben Carson's life. When TV was gone, his IQ went up, and he went from the bottom of the class to the top of the class. He also made better choices in music at that time. And this is crucial. We see this in many young people. We'll tell young people who are struggling and want to be very successful, quit watching TV for 1 year, and then come back and take the courses. And they'll be at the top of the class the next year as a result of quitting their TV. And now we're looking at screen time in general. Facebook actually does not come out very high in regards to improving your IQ or your EQ. In fact, it threatens it significantly. We really ought to rename it Pride Book instead of Facebook sometimes. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't be useful on Facebook. I must admit, I have a Facebook page. I also admit I have no idea how to get on that Facebook page. I have countless friends, thousands of friends. There's someone at my office that monitors it, and it actually says that so that when someone thinks they're writing to me, they get a little statement back saying, no, it's a monitored site. But I do that because if I'm going to show up in Omaha, Nebraska, I'll put out a little Facebook thing, and then people in that area that are connected with us will know that they can come to a meeting that we're doing in that particular city. So there can be useful things about Facebook. It's not that we need to condemn it entirely. But in regards to entertainment television, actually studies have shown no useful things. Even if the programming content is good, the rapid scene of reference change will suppress the frontal lobe of the brain. Now, if it's just a single lecture and a single camera view, or the camera view is switched very infrequently, your frontal lobe can actually still be very functional and enhanced. So it's not the screen itself, it's the rapid scene of reference change that takes place. We must exercise it. Just like a muscle, if we don't use it, we're going to lose it. And one of the best ways of exercising it, we just talked about, studying the Word of God. Working with your hands in 3D is critically important. The back part of your frontal lobe is where your hands and arms are controlled. And when you do things repetitively that way, your frontal lobe circulation will increase. So if you're not doing something every day, or at least 6 times a week, repetitively with your hands, you need to change your lifestyle. That might mean you need to get rid of your dishwasher so that you can do something repetitively with your hands. It might mean that you need to start a garden. It may mean, it actually is one of the reasons why I still do, with all the demands on me, I still do a lot of gastroenterology, because that's procedures that I'm doing on patients. I'm having to work with both hands in 3D and do things and take out things and those sorts of things. And because those procedures are scheduled, it's just one of those mandated things. I'm not going to be able to get out of working with my hands in 3D. But if you just have a brain job, one of the things that we notice, because we hire some of these people that are computer-type people. The computer people are primarily working just in 2D and in software, and they get burned out rather readily. Their IQ actually begins to go down. They're not as successful over time, and so it's important for them to have some sort of hobby that they're working on a regular basis, where they're working with their hands in 3D. Regular circadian and circumception rhythms. We talked about the Sabbath, but the best circadian rhythm is early to bed, early to rise. So, I know many of you want to be more intelligent, want to be more analytical, have a greater capacity to empathize with others, have better discernment, greater ability to see into the future, greater ability to overcome an addiction that requires frontal lobe power, and have a greater power to follow your conscience. If you answer yes to any of those questions, I would encourage you to review your life habits and see what you can do to change. This is the only area that God can communicate with us. We're told that very specifically as our brains. And so why would we ever voluntarily make our brains less effective? And one of the areas I just mentioned, it's a major concern, is the increased use in alcohol and drugs. All of those are designed to suppress the frontal lobe of the brain. Not just when you're under the influence, but they have long-term effects. Alcohol, as far as critical abstract thinking, it takes 2 weeks for your critical abstract thinking to come back after alcohol. That's why it's best to completely abstain from it. And unfortunately, I'll just say very clearly, I blame a lot of the religious institutions for the increased use in alcohol in this world, because most of them have caved on the subject entirely. I'm actually on a board, or I was on a board. Our local hospital in Ardmore, Oklahoma, sold out to a large Catholic system called the Sisters of Mercy. And I was on the board at the time it happened. I didn't vote for that change, but I got outvoted. And the Sisters of Mercy came and took charge of the hospital. And the chairman of the board was a very go-getter nun from the Catholic Church. The president of our hospital, she was from St. Louis, but the president of our hospital, of course, knew me, and for her birthday gave her a copy of the book that I wrote called Proof Positive. And in that book, we have a chapter called Want a Drink. And I went through all the scientific studies in regards to alcohol and the problems that it causes. You know, even here in South Africa, it's the 3rd leading cause of death. It's a major contributor to demise and disease. And even if it didn't do that, what it does to the frontal lobe is significantly problematic. And I was interested a little bit about, what she thought of the book. I never asked her, but I sat next to her at one of the board meetings, and she said, by the way, that book, Proof Positive, she goes, that is a very interesting book. And she says, particularly chapter 17, Want a Drink. And now you need to understand something. I don't know how many Catholics you have in South Africa, but there's a lot in North America, and alcohol is actually part of the religion. You know, if you don't drink, you're not really a good Catholic, so to speak. And so it's very immersed in the Roman Catholic culture. And of course, even at Mass, you take a little bit of alcohol with the wafer, and of course the priests have problems with it, the nuns have problems. In fact, one of her nun underlings embarrasses the hospital every time there's a party in regards to what she does when she gets drunk. So I was curious as a Catholic what she would think about that chapter, and she says, there actually is an order of nuns that's been trying to change the Catholic stance on alcohol. It's such a major problem with our people. And she says, I have copied that chapter, and she says, I've actually ordered some more books because I know I shouldn't do that. But I've copied that chapter and sent it to this order of nuns to give them better ammunition in campaigning the Vatican to change our stance on alcohol. I said, do you think they have a chance? She smiled and says, are you kidding? Not with the Vatican. They're not going to have any chance. But she says at least it gives them more ammunition. And she says, I actually agree with what you wrote there in that chapter. So those types of things. But when religions sit there and promote it and say it's not a problem, you are going to have increased usage, because religions can indeed do a lot to take a better stance on this. But Romans chapter 12, finally I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that ye present your bodies a living sacrifice, wholly acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. To live a lifestyle that is frontal lobe enhancing at first seems very sacrificial. I'll tell you this as a youth meeting. Most youth, they think one of the most sacrificial things that they'll have to do is stop watching movies and entertainment television. I mean, it's so immersed in the young culture. The newest movie, let's download it. Let's get it for free. let's look at it. Let's have a good time. Let's all get together and watch this. Compromising, significant compromise of their EQ and IQ as a result of that experience. Yeah, they might feel good during the time and even a little bit afterwards when they talk about it, but in reality, by the time it's over with, they're not even really feeling virtually any better than they did when they started. And in regards to the compromise on what it's done to them, it's compromised them in ways that they don't even realize. And so this seems to be one of the areas that young people have the biggest struggle with, but I can tell you every young person who has decided to give it up a year later has never regretted it. Never regretted it. And talks about all of the advantages now that they never even noticed, they never even experienced before. So whatever it is, caffeine, by the way, is another drug that subtly suppresses the frontal lobe of the brain. You're more likely to gossip, studies show, when you have caffeine on board. A recent study called it the silent killer of emotional intelligence. And so that's another thing that young people can have a hard time with. But there's other things as well. But Paul says, present your bodies a living sacrifice, wholly acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. And he says, do not be conformed to this world. Don't be conformed to the culture. You know, the culture is all shifting to frontal lobe compromise. One of the reasons why our economies are in a mess, country after country, is simply due to the corporate frontal lobe compromise of people who put those leaders in there. And we would have far better, a far better economic situation in virtually every country in the world if we didn't have this corporate frontal lobe compromise that seems to be getting worse. And so it does require us to not conform to the culture of this world. But be ye what? Transformed how? By the renewing of your mind, that ye may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. So since this is a youth meeting and there are some young people here, thank the Lord there are some young people. The health message is actually more for the young people than it is for the older people. But here's what she says in regards to youth and the health message. Dear youth, God calls upon you to do a work which through His grace, you what? You can do. This is something you can all do. Show a purity of taste, appetite, and habits that bears comparison with who? With Daniel. Did Daniel have to go against the culture of his day? Absolutely. In fact, some people would say he was narrow and bigoted because he basically put his life on the line in regards to what he was eating and what he was drinking. But yet he did it in a very tactful way. He proposed a study, the first prospective epidemiological study. The study showed the results that he knew it would because the Lord had already revealed that in inspiration, and then he was allowed to eat that way and have that type of lifestyle. Show a purity of taste, appetite, and habits that bears comparison with Daniel's, and this statement says God will reward you with 4 things. Calm nerves, a clear brain, an unimpaired judgment, keen perceptions. The youth of today, whose principles are firm and unwavering, will be blessed with health of body, mind, and soul. That's what the Lord is looking for. Now, Revelation. I know Dr. Larry Lichtenwalter has been talking about Revelation. I don't know if he's talked about this verse. You can tell me if he has. But after we get to some of those closing scenes in Revelation, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, it's going to be clear before this world ends that Babylon has fallen. In other words, the ones who are propping up Babylon at this point in time will actually see that they should have never been propping it up, that it caused virtually all the disasters that are coming on this world. And they will reject Babylon themselves at a time when it's too late, actually. And so the question is asked in Revelation, how did this happen? How did the masses get enthralled with supporting Babylon? And the answer is given. First, in regards to the fall, it says the light of the candle shall no more shine at all in thee. The voice of the bridegroom and of the bride shall be heard no more at all in thee. And then it gives the reason. For thy merchants were the great men of the earth, for by thy sorceries were all nations deceived. Do you know what the Greek word is for sorcery? Someone mentioned it. Pharmakia. Pharmakia actually is where we get what word? Pharmacy. It's the drugging down of the frontal lobe of the brain that opens up the massive support for Babylon. And so this is why the drug industry is thriving. This is why marijuana is now becoming legal in the United States. By the way, marijuana shows that when you use it regularly, it permanently lowers your IQ. It lowers your motivation to levels that are the lowest you'll find in the drug world. But now it's becoming something that's going to be acceptable and should be, used recreationally. In fact, businessmen are putting millions of dollars into marijuana right now because they know it's an easy way to make money. And by the way, if you want to make the easiest money in the world, it's a very unethical way to do it. Design something that will suppress the frontal lobe of human beings, and you will make a lot of money selling that product. And so the merchants make a lot of money doing this. Thy merchants were the great men of the earth, for by thy sorceries were all nations deceived. And it's not just drugs. The movie industry, we talked about the music industry, a lot of that has drug-like effects in suppressing the brain. So I encourage you, don't be set up for the tremendous disappointment of supporting a false system. Choose to enhance the brain that the Lord has given you. A couple of final closing statements. The Lord has given man capacity for continual improvement and has granted him all possible aid in the work. Look at the capacity that we have. And we've been granted capacity for continual improvement, and he's granted him aid by instruction and by his power. Through the provisions of divine grace, she says, we may attain almost to the excellence of angels. That's what we can obtain. And so my closing verse comes from the wise man, Proverbs. For wisdom is better than rubies. No matter what you desire, he says, and all the things that may be desired are not to be compared to it. So if you have a choice for all the money in the world, if you have a choice for whatever your object of desire is, there's something that is more important than that object of your desire, and that is wisdom. So choose now to get on the pathway to improve the frontal lobe of your brain. By coming here today, you've walked into the largest room in the world, and that is the room for improvement. So take advantage of it. Pray to the Lord to give you the strength to go over things that you might have an addictive relationship to in suppressing your frontal lobe. And go from being maybe considered good to becoming a Daniel in your society. Let's bow our heads. Father in heaven, we thank you that you have offered us the life of Daniel and told us that we can obtain that clear brain, unimpaired judgment, keen perceptions. May each person here choose to consume a diet and drink and lifestyle habits and entertainment that bears comparisons with Daniel's, so that we might be a much better light in the world and also be able to help others stem the tide of the support of Babylon so that they can also be saved eternally. We thank you for hearing and answering this prayer. In Jesus' name, amen.